Hey, this is Abe with Genuinely Useful Podcast.
Section 704 states that no health or environmental concern may interfere with the placement of a cellular antenna as long as the antenna complies with FCC regulations.
Like my footsteps you hear crossing this bridge located in the Amazon jungle, the sounds of the interconnected web of living beings are reverberating and communicating throughout the jungle. And the sounds of the jungle, can you feel it buzzing? Can you feel it vibrating? In exploring esoteric traditions, like we talked about in the previous episode with Robert Foss, you'll find the law or principle of vibration. Simply put, everything vibrates. From a scientific perspective, there are two terms I'd like to go over quickly: frequency and electromagnetic field. So just to go to Wikipedia, it's a good place to start. Frequency is an important parameter used in science and engineering to specify the rate of oscillatory and vibratory phenomena such as mechanical vibrations, audio signals or sound, radio waves, and light. An electromagnetic field, also EMF or EM field, it's a magnetic field produced by moving electrically charged objects. Electromagnetic interaction is one of the four fundamental forces of nature. The others are gravitation, weak interaction, and strong interaction. So this episode begins a journey for us. We're starting today with electromagnetics, specifically the human-created kind of electromagnetic radiation emitted by wireless technologies like cell phones, cell towers, cordless DECT phones, like the wireless landline, Wi-Fi, and smart meters. So now to shift to our guest today, Katie Singer. On her website, electronicsilentspring.com, all living creatures need the Earth's EMFs in order to navigate, digest food, reproduce, and more. Human-made EMFs emitted by electromagnetic technologies can interfere with and harm living creatures' basic functioning. Katie Singer's book, An Electronic Silent Spring, focuses on how mobile phones and Wi-Fi affect children and how wireless technologies can interfere with medical implants like insulin pumps, cardiac pacemakers, and deep brain stimulators. An Electronic Silent Spring also offers an extensive solutions section for policymakers, telecom and utility companies, schools, civic groups, and individuals who want EMF solutions and protection for EMF. Katie's websites, electronicsilentspring.com and ourweb.tech, are in the show notes, along with enough references that you could explore and go through the scientific journals and peer-reviewed papers. That you could do that for quite a while, and I encourage you to do it. Check the references. There's also a link to web form that will send me an email, so you can message me in just a few seconds without even opening up your own email, just through a web browser. So if you have questions or comments, thoughts that you want to share, I'd love to hear from you. So that's you in particular, wherever you are in the world right now. Here is Katie Singer.
Where I am with 5G is seeing lots of people become concerned about telecommunications, which has, let's begin by saying that the internet is the largest thing that humanity has built. And so the consequences of using it, the consequences to public health, to our environment, to energy consumption, to worker hazards, to privacy, surveillance, all of those things are proportionate to it being the largest thing that we've built. And we don't have regulations for it, essentially. We're just building it exponentially without due diligence. And so, yes, lots of people are becoming aware of the scale of problems because 5G is now coming into their neighborhoods. What I see that's missing is the 150 years of telecommunications developments before right now, before this build out of 5G. So for me, I want people informed about, at least the last century of developments, so that they can be informed intelligently as they respond to the 5G that's getting built out.
Yeah, it's the appearance of all these technologies that we have that we seemingly don't understand, and then the effects come out after the fact. Like whether it's, I was just looking at something about herbicides, and people were like, it's totally safe, and other people, it's all cancer, or different types of radiation. Like I remember watching a video of a bunch of soldiers watching nuclear blast in the 50s, and they're really close to the blast, and the wave, that kind of the shock wave goes over them, and they're all laughing. And I'm pretty sure most of those guys didn't live to ripe old ages. Just like these tests that were being done, kind of on the fly. It's almost like on the job training. It's like, well, we'll just roll this stuff out and then we'll see how it goes. Because when I was young, I'm 41, and I grew up on the Ohio River and next to a national forest, and there were no cell phones then. We had 3 TV channels and maybe like some staticky 4th channel at best, and it was just go run around outside, and there were no cell phones or anything. And then I remember when dial-up came in, and what a cool thing this is, even though it was by standards now completely painful to work with. And then get into college, and we have computer labs, and we can go in and get on the network and search and do research. So not even having to go to the library.
So let me see if I can. Let's say that. Well, I consider myself a kindergartner, and I've done extraordinary research really for the last 10 years. And I say the word extraordinary because I've been really privileged to talk with engineers and medical doctors and lawyers about the development of telecommunications. And I'm the kindergartner in the room who doesn't understand anything. And I'm also a writer. So I've said to them, if they can explain to me what's going on, then I can, so that I understand it, then I can explain to other kindergartners what's happening. And when I talk with people, or when I read things in the newspaper, when I or on media, I'm concerned that people have the beginning steps of, I want everyone to have the ABCs of telecommunications. I want them to have a telecom 101 class so that we're all in kindergarten, and then we can really go places and ask intelligent questions about the current situation. So could we go there? Could we
Yeah.
cover some of those kindergarten issues?
Yeah, it's good to have like the building blocks of like basic definitions that we're talking about, so that there's context to kind of filter through the higher level stuff, even if that's still like kindergarten plus. It still gives a framework to understand and interpret what's going on.
Yes. So let me start with one of my main teachers, Gary Olheft. He's a geophysicist and an electrical engineer with an incredibly varied career. I'm not going to go there, but he explained, he would start our lessons by going back a few billion years. That's, before we had man-made laws or mobile phones, and the whole planet was a mass of gases, water, dust, and rock. And then there was a buildup of charge, and lightning began to strike. Actually, it was a bombardment of lightning storms, and these led to nucleic and amino acids, and those are the building blocks of life. Then early plants made oxygen, and they paved the way for animals. Okay, plants and animals still function by electrochemical signals. So do our brains and hearts. Like basically every organ in our bodies functions by electrochemical signals. Like even at rest, all cells have measurable voltage. So in other words, without electromagnetic energy, none of us would be here. Okay, now I'm going to fast forward a few billion years to the ancient Greeks. And this is a few thousand years ago. They knew how to generate electricity, but they didn't know how to store or transmit it. And the Greeks also created a regulatory system for health, which was basically first do no harm. That was their basic regulatory system for health care.
Hippocratic Oath.
Yes. And around 1750, we humans figured out how to store electrical energy. By 1880, we also knew how to transmit it over long distances. So then we created batteries and motors and electric lights, and we started building things like refrigerators, and we transitioned from visible mechanical technologies that were powered by horse and human muscle. Then we got steam and hydropower, and then we got electromagnetic technologies where power is invisible. Now, and we're recording, toward the end of 2019, this is like 140 years after we began laying out an electric power grid. We have nearly saturated our environment with electrical and magnetic frequency fields and amplitudes, none of which exist in nature. So we've changed the Earth's electromagnetic environment more significantly than any time since humans showed up on the planet. Most of this change comes from our electric power grid, and more recently from cell phones and Wi-Fi. Okay, so that's a few billion years of electromagnetic evolution or history and change, and to recognize the massiveness of the change in our electromagnetic environment in the last 150 years. We have to do that.
And so like the base level frequencies that are going on, like the Schumann resonance of the planet itself, and then all of the ways that interacts with our own bodies, electromagnetics, that whole dynamic.
So the Schumann resonance, which is 7.83 hertz, which would be almost 8 switch cycles per second. I think we might call that the Earth's primary resonance. But there are many resonances, generated by the Earth. And we also have the solar wind and lightning. I mean, all of those are generating electromagnetic frequencies. They're generated by nature. And all living creatures are designed to function in response to those frequencies. Everyone knows, for example, that, if you're sick, it's really great to walk barefoot on the beach or just on the earth. It's really healing to do that.
Yeah, it's good for jet lag, because I've heard jet lag is part of that has the effect of changing our position on the planet, and how the frequencies within the planet are kind of affecting our own nervous system, and then that change that happens within hours or on a completely different part of the planet is part of the reason why, say, some people going east to west is better than going west to east. And then, when people get to the island, they're like, go to the beach right away and ground.
Okay, so that's because of the Earth's electromagnetic energy, which is really supportive and nourishing. What we've done in the last 150 years is saturate this natural environment with man-made frequencies. And they come in multiple layers. So we've got the electric power grid, which introduces alternating current electricity, 60 hertz. Then we've got different devices that some are wired, some are wireless, and then the infrastructure to operate them. So they may come with routers. They've certainly got cell sites, like cellular antennas on cell towers, or now public right-of-ways, the small cell sites for 5G. And I should clarify that, so 3G, for example, means third generation of wireless infrastructure, mobile infrastructure. 4G is fourth generation for mobile infrastructure, and 5G is fifth generation. So those are all operating at the same time. They don't cancel each other out. They are using different frequencies.
So it's all stacked on top of each other.
Exactly, yeah. And then each device is, that's another clarification. So we've got a device will give near body exposure when you, for example, hold the cell phone beside your head, or you have a laptop in your lap. That's near body exposure. Or if you just keep a device in your pocket or your bag, your purse, near the side of your body, that's near body exposure. And then there's also whole body exposure, which we get from routers and cellular antennas, even, satellite-based Wi-Fi. That's whole body exposure.
Would it also be whole body if you're if you're in a classroom and everybody has their phones in there? Like if you're in a school or an auditorium and everybody has their cell phones, and that's all these phones are pinging the tower and communicating their position, and would that also? I mean, that would excellent
observation. Excellent. And then this is interesting. I mean, the situation can compound. Say that you're in an elevator, which is a metal box. So then, or you're in a car, which is also a metal box. And you're using a cell phone in the metal box. The signal, the device will have to work harder to receive or transmit a signal to the nearest cell tower. So then your exposure, like the device will go to its highest power capability, and the radiation will bounce around within the metal box, within the car or within the elevator, for example.
Because those are acting kind of like an antenna too, right? The metal?
That's an interesting question. I haven't heard talk about that, but the radiation won't have a way to get out. It'll be bouncing around.
Just bouncing around.
If you're in a house with a metal roof, if you've got mobile devices operating within it, that would also be a concern. Or if you've got aluminum siding. And in some cases, years ago, engineers who, say, had extremely sensitive equipment for testing something, they would build like Faraday cages or other. They would have rooms that were sealed off, maybe through copper siding or something, so that they could not receive signals from outside in order to use their equipment.
So is that something like Gary Olhaft would do? I mean, is that?
Yes. Yeah, he did that as a geophysicist when he would test, say, soil samples for chemicals that might need to be cleared out of the soil. He spent lots of money creating rooms where his equipment would function and would not be disrupted by signals from, could be a nearby manufacturing plant or, a cell tower or anything. So yeah, that, and when there is interference, that's called electronic interference. And a lot of people might recognize it, say, from having a radio going on at the same time that you're trying to work a dimmer switch. And then the radio might not, you might get really staticky radio because the dimmer switch is interfering with the radio's
Well, see, I've heard that with, like when I'm driving, I remember kind of, I was driving with one of my friends and coworkers one time, and we had our work cell phones, and I got used to hearing in the radio, there was this little sound that I would hear before the call would come in, and we were driving, and I heard this little sound, so I picked up the phone and started to answer it before it rang. And it flipped my friend out. He was like, "Dude, how did you know that?" Because I think it was the cellular coming in, crossing into the radio frequency boundary. I'm not sure what exactly was happening there. I know it's like a pre-call effect or something that the cellular does, but it was kind of a neat little party trick to kind of pull off.
So this makes me think of, this is a great segue. I want to go back now to 1934, which is when Congress passed the Broadcasting Act, and that established the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission.
So that was the Passive Broadcasting Act, yeah?
That was 1934.
Okay. And
one of the first things the FCC engineers did was define harmful interference, which is it's not exactly what you're talking about, because it sounds like there wasn't any electronic interference happening. You were just picking something up. But so in 1934, FCC defined harmful interference. And that is anything that interferes with existing radio or TV broadcasts. And now harmful interference, the definition, includes internet or cellular services. So in other words, you can invent and market anything you want as long as it doesn't interfere with existing radio, TV, internet, or cellular services. That definition of harmful interference has never included biological harm.
Oh.
So that means that you can market anything you want if the radiation signal, so like when you're picking up something where you could somehow sense that a call was coming in before the ringer went off, you were somehow you were sensing that, either through a vibration or something auditory that your friend wasn't able to hear. I don't know how you did that, but you did. And that, okay, if we have basically thousands of studies showing that there are biological impacts from exposure to man-made radiation. But we
Yeah.
need to clarify that since 1934, the FCC has not recognized them.
How do you see the conversation happening where, like, how do people not know that? Because, I mean, last night I was just going through some, like, internet chat room kind of things, doing just internet searches on this kind of stuff for kicks and extra prep. But it was people saying the classic, like, there's no evidence and it's never been shown. And even in media and articles where they're saying, oh, well, there's no definitive link shown to there being harm from cell phones, even as far as like direct thermal heating. We can't even agree on that. So do you have any insight on how we're still arguing about the basic levels of even just thermal heating of a cell phone when there's obviously so many studies, like, and so many of them are in your book, Electronic Silent Spring. So
okay, so let me say I've heard you ask two questions.
Yeah.
The first one was, how do I or anyone else, how do we account for our not including biological harm as a consequence of using all this really cool technology?
Yeah.
So that's one question. And like, how did that happen? And let's hang out there for a second. I will say personally, I don't think there was, a hoax or, a conspiracy theory. I don't think people were meant anything ill. I think that when electrification really started blossoming around 1900, and there was radio and TV and color TV and telephones and blenders and washing machines and refrigerators, I think people were so dazzled by the conveniences and the changes and just having light at night, that totally changed daily lives. It changed everything. And my sense is that people didn't want to interfere in any way with invention. They couldn't see that there could be any harm because it was so fantastic what people were coming up with.
Well, I mean, it starts during the Depression, and so.
Oh, it's way earlier than the Depression.
Well, I'm just thinking of like the Telecommunications Act that came out in '34, where everything's been moving for a few decades, the 30, 40 or 3 or 4 decades, and it's like, let's keep going. We need to build things. We need to do infrastructure. We need to increase communication. We need the economy to keep moving, and then the war happens. And then this the Cold War, so it's just like keep charging. We got to keep up. We got to compete, and we need to. Dominate.
And the war, the war brought on developments in radar.
Radar, yeah.
Which was major, and so I think basically.
And sonar, for that matter, right?
Sure.
With the submarines.
All of that's sure. I mean, all of that was just. It was just dazzling to people. Okay, and then, but now let me go to the other question that you were asking is, so lots of people say, hey, there are no studies showing, say, thermal effects or other kinds of hazards. So, why don't these people who are concerned about, biological effects just get out of the way, because this stuff that we're developing is completely cool. Okay, so let me break that question down.
Yeah.
And I'm actually going to go to an invention that is another electronic device. It would be the cardiac pacemaker. People started getting those implanted in 1958. And, and it worked. I mean, it was this electronic device, right, that helped people's hearts pace appropriately. Well, these folks would go to a restaurant, and they would be seated at a table, and there'd be a microwave oven on the other side of the wall. And they would have electronic interference. If the microwave oven was turned on while they were sitting there, there would be interference that would cause their pacemaker to malfunction or shut off because of the activity from the microwave oven. So it took 13 years of complaints from people with cardiac pacemakers. But finally, in 1971, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, said, okay, we hear you. We're going to require restaurants to post a sign on the other side of their walls saying, warning, there's a microwave oven on the other side of this wall. So people with cardiac pacemakers might not want to sit at that table.
That's nice of them.
Okay, now let me clarify again. That was electronic interference from one device to another device.
Yeah.
It's not considered biological harm. It's interfering with the pacemaker, not with the person.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see how our thinking really changed when we got all this cool stuff. We bowed down first and foremost to the technology, and we just left biology and nature behind. That's how our thinking changed. Now, we also, as we started developing more devices, and I'll jump now specifically to mobile phones. Okay, so say now we're in the mid-90s, and the FCC said, okay, let's see if there's any harm here. Let's see if there are any immediate thermal effects from having a cell phone beside your head. So thermal is about temperature. So what the FCC did was they took what's called a standard anthropomorphic model, otherwise known as SAM. This is a plastic dude that weighs about 220 pounds. They filled his head with salty fluid, and then they took his temperature. Then they gave him a cell phone, a mid-90s cell phone, for 6 minutes. And then they took his temperature again. And because his temperature did not change by 2 degrees Celsius, that's almost 4 degrees Fahrenheit, in those 6 minutes, mobile devices are safe to market in the United States.
So as long as you're not literally cooking the biology with heat, then it's all good. Nothing else could be going on. Huh.
In 6 minutes, it's an immediate test. It's you want to see an immediate thermal response of 2 degrees Celsius, or it's safe, according to the FCC. Now, that's pretty shocking to a lot of people. And of course, they weren't recognizing, well, what about a pregnant woman? Or what about a baby or a child? What if you're exposed to a mobile phone and you're sleeping beside a router at the same time, or you're going to school and there's an antenna on the roof, or you're going to work and there's an antenna on the roof at the same time that you're talking, 45 minutes a day with the cell phone held beside your head. None of those situations are recognized by the FCC. The FCC only recognizes immediate thermal effects, and that test was conducted in the mid-90s.
So that's getting into like the non-ionizing radiation, non-thermal effects, right?
Right. Now, and let me clarify. So right now we're just talking about exposure to devices which are held near the body. We do have thousands of studies showing that there are non-thermal effects from exposure. If people are interested in learning about that, I can recommend a few places, a few websites that catalog all of these studies. I would say Dr. Joel Moskowitz, who's a public health researcher at UC Berkeley, he's done a great job. His site is saferemr.com. That's S as in safe, AFER, and then EMR for electromagnetic radiation. saferemr.com. You can also go to bioinitiative.org. That is a longtime site operated by Cindy Sage and Dr. David Carpenter. If you start there, you'll get thousands of studies.
And that's the Bioinitiative report that they did, right?
Yes, they've done 2 of them, and but they have updates as well.
That's a massive report. I downloaded that. It's like 1,500 pages and pretty rigorous.
And then we have the newer, the National Toxicology Program, which is part of NIH, National Institutes of Health. I did not report on this in my book, An Electronic Silent Spring, because it didn't come out until, I think 2016. But the National Toxicology Program did a 10-year study. It cost more than $25 million with rodents. It was an impeccably designed study of 2G cell phone radiation.
Oh.
And what they found is that unequivocally, exposure creates brain tumors, specifically glioblastomas, and malignant heart schwannomas, which are also heart tumors in the heart, and then damages DNA. Those 3 things are what they found. And there are still papers examining other aspects of this NTP study. It was really interesting when it came out 3 years ago. A lot of media and the American Cancer Association just said, okay, the evidence here is inconclusive. And, that would be false. And you can see at saferemr.com. I'm also going to recommend Microwave News. I don't remember if that's a .org or a .com. Microwave News is run by Louis Slesson, and he ran Microwave News for the industry, I believe starting in the 1980s, because industry officials were concerned about their exposure to radiation. And so check out Microwave News. But these are run by scientists, with peer-reviewed papers. And if we do check out what their reports find, well, we might have to revise our thinking and our expectations of these devices and our behavior. And I think that's probably the resistance to that is, it's influencing our response to these well-performed scientific studies.
Because I mean, on one side, there's all the scientific evidence, and I read papers, and I don't know anybody that's gotten like brain cancer on it. So I think in partially in my own mind, over time, there's been this like, yeah, I think these things definitely cause problems, but I haven't seen, like everybody that went to school with getting brain cancer. I don't think that by any standard means that there aren't effects. But then there's like my personal like experience growing up. Like I knew people that lived directly underneath power line, like the big power line causeways that go through the mountains, and and I remember hearing stories about health problems happening there, and I remember my mom talking about how it's not healthy to live underneath of it. I mean, these are the things that you can hear crackling and hissing. And then there's things like, hey, when I put this phone up to my head, my ear kind of hurts and it actually feels warm. And then when I first got an iPhone, I bought a used one off of Amazon for pretty cheap. And when I would hold it in my hand, I was like, my hands are buzzing. Like I can feel like tingling in my hands. That's not good. And I called Apple and said, hey, like this doesn't seem right. And they actually took the phone back and gave me a replacement phone because they were like, that's not good. And then there's like Bluetooth, right? And I bought some AirPods a couple years ago because I was like, wow, wireless earbuds? That sounds amazing. I won't be catching my cable on the doorknobs or and ripping the earbuds out of my ears. This is amazing. And I was wearing them and I was like, something seems weird with this. And then I read about how supposedly the AirPods are like communicating from left ear to right ear through my brain. And I'm like, that doesn't seem good. And then I read up about all these different people, so many people reporting getting headaches using this stuff. And then my fiance Amber, when I came back from an international trip, and she's like, hey, here's the study on the AirPods. And I read it. And where I'm going with this is like the willful denial of myself to things that I already knew, but I really wanted the wireless. I wanted the Bluetooth. And I was like, how harmful could it be? And then I read these things and then I compared that with my own physical experience. But then what happened was I actually got like kind of angry a little bit, like at Apple, because I was like, wait, why would you broadcast through my brain? And why would you, and even if that's not true, even if it's not, because the internet's, it's kind of hard to find stuff about how Apple products work because they don't really tell you all the time, probably because they're not required to. And then even if it's not, what are the effects are happening? I'm like, why would they sell me this thing that I think is awesome and that I want, but is actually harming me? And then I went through now I have to reconnect to wires. So it was like this scaling back thing of saying, here's this technology that's not good in a variety of different ways. And now I have to take it away from myself. Like that was really hard. And so I would put that through the lens of myself, who I feel like I research these things and I'm pretty aware of it, even if I'm still using it. I know something's off. But that kind of withdrawal to taking away this new technology that I have, and I imagine what it would be like to do that on a larger scale, how hard that would be. If we're all of a sudden we're saying, oh, you can't, Wi-Fi is not good to have on all the time, or it can create all these physical effects, like if you use a cell phone before you go to bed, it shows EEG changes in your brain, right? That was in your book, I think.
Yes.
Like, because where I go with all this stuff is, okay, we've gone too far. Hey, these things are actually showing problems, but now we're starting to talk about the effects of biology on ourselves, but also like with bees and with birds and how you were talking about cryptochrome, the effect on cryptochrome. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Okay, so ape.
I know. I'm going on a bunch of different things here. Like
yeah, and it's really. I mean, I'm enjoying hearing where you're going with this. Let me see if I can.
So you can dial me back.
Yeah. Let me tell you what I'm hearing. First, when you say, "Hey, I don't know anybody who's gotten brain cancer, so I must be okay." I'm going to keep using this because it is so cool. and then you have a little, I don't know, a headache or something's, buzzing in your hand or something's not feeling right. And okay, but still, it's so cool. How can you quit using this thing, right? Now, one of the things that happens when you start getting informed is that you learn about the myriad of problems that come besides brain cancer. And like I'll say do you know the most increasing kind of cancer in the United States right now? It's thyroid cancer. Well, where do people hold their phones?
Yeah.
And then I have heard in my circle about lots of people with tongue cancer. When I was growing up, I never heard of tongue cancer. So these are cancers, but also we have skyrocketing autism rates. We have skyrocketing diabetes rates. Lots of neurological problems, like things like Parkinson's and other neurological diseases. Okay, if you look, there are studies that will show we need to look at the relationship between exposure and these diseases. Insomnia, I mean, there's just, you mentioned headaches. And then there's also electronic interference between medical implants and devices, like the cardiac pacemaker and microwave ovens. But also people say who have insulin pumps or deep brain stimulators for Parkinson's or cochlear implants for hearing challenges, all of those devices can experience electronic interference with things like metal detectors when you walk through the doors at the post office or in a shopping mall. So I could go on and on about different kinds of biological effects and what happens if a baby is exposed in utero and then starts using a laptop or a smartphone before they have speech. Like, how does that affect them and their brain development when they're teenagers or when they're adults? We don't have studies about that, but we've got it in practice. We know lots of children who are using devices before they have speech. So anyway, yes, how are cognitive abilities impacted and different organs? And everyone is going to have a different equation. Like you were saying that, you grew up with 3 TV channels and you didn't really start using the internet until you became a teenager. Okay, and then you went to college and probably there were still landlines in your dorm room. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, I would expect that those landlines are gone and students can only have cell phones and routers in the hallways for internet access, and with cell towers nearby, they're going to have different exposure experiences than you had, and certainly than I had as a child. But maybe I'm using 2 hours a day. Maybe I'm using a cell phone 2 hours a day, and I'm living beside a smart meter. My bedroom might be right beside a smart meter, which is an electric utility meter. So everyone's going to have different exposures, and in a different body. Like the size of your body matters, and the size of your head, and whether you're dehydrated, or all of those things affect your body's response to exposure to electromagnetic radiation. I'm kind of on a roll here. Do you want to break in, or because I have something else?
Oh, keep going. Yeah.
To say that. Okay, so we know that FCC does not recognize non-thermal effects. It only recognizes immediate thermal effects of devices. In terms of infrastructure, that's like the cell towers. In 1996, Congress updated that Broadcasting Act that they first passed in 1934. So it's now the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Section 704 states that no health or environmental concern may interfere with the placement of a cellular antenna as long as the antenna complies with FCC regulations. I can say that again.
Yeah.
No health or environmental concern can interfere with the placement of a cellular antenna. So that means if there's a church, say, in your neighborhood, and AT&T or Verizon goes to the church and says, we want to put a cell tower in your church steeple, and we'll give you $1,500 a month for the space, and we'll provide, we'll increase the clarity and the broadband for the neighborhood, and you'll get $1,500 a month. Okay. Then they take this request for a permit to the city council, to the city planning and land use office. Well, if somebody says, hey, if the city votes and says, we deny this permit because we're concerned about the effects of this cell tower on the health of the people in this church, could be a nursery school in the church, we're concerned about their health and about the health of people in the neighborhood. Or we've been reading about how wildlife are affected by exposure to these cell towers. So we're going to deny this permit. Okay, that is prohibited by Section 704 of the Telecommunications Act of 1996. A municipality may not deny a permit based on health or environmental concerns.
Are there places where this technology has been successfully kind of shut down, or the expansion of it has been kind of curbed, but through a different kind of legal channel?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that occasionally one tower may be thwarted. And then typically what happens is the telecom corporation will just go a couple blocks down the road. So, in the big picture, the answer, unfortunately, is no. In a little picture, there have been some examples. If we go now to 5G, which is fifth generation of wireless technologies, we also have laws that started getting passed at the federal and state and municipal levels starting around 2016. And these are even more stringent than the Telecommunications Act. They clearly state that you cannot have a moratorium on 5G for any reason. And there are some towns in California that have a temporary moratorium. I'm encouraged about that, but again, in the big picture,
like it's on the way.
the corporate, right? It's on the way, and the corporations have all kinds of laws backing them up.
And so a lot of this is the difference between strong fields and weak fields, right? Because people will say, oh, well, these fields are too weak. They're not again, it's not the thermal effect that most of the studies are based on, but this weak effect that's like chronic exposure.
Right. And that is, that's kind of interesting because, okay, let's go to AC, alternating current electricity, which operates at 60 hertz. So that's, a really low electromagnetic frequency. Well, what's interesting is that our organs function in those lower frequencies. So as I understand, the brain at rest is at 10 hertz, which is pretty close to the Schumann resonance, which is 7.83 hertz. I've also learned that flaming anger, when you're in flaming anger, the brain is at about 33 hertz. Okay, so if you're so you've got, you're surrounded by 60 hertz wires, and then say there are harmonics on the wires, chopped current, which can come from electronic devices and power supplies and all kinds of things. That's going to be another kind of radiation. We know musicians don't like those harmonics on their wires when they're recording fine music, but we haven't looked at how harmonics impact our health. And so basically I'm saying those lower frequencies can affect health, and we have studies showing it. And then the higher frequencies, a microwave oven is, I think it's 2.4 gigahertz, which would be almost 2.5 billion vibrations per second. Well, cellular phones and Wi-Fi operate at 2.45 gigahertz. I sometimes get those confused. I can't remember. One is 2.45, one is just 2.4. And cell phones are modulated, which means they have two frequencies going at the same time for the device to operate. Now, that also, modulation doesn't exist in nature. So I keep going, but different, like insects can operate in those higher frequencies.
Looks like it's in like magnetic, like the magnetic, like directional navigation and things like that.
Okay, so now you're talking about something else, which is cryptochrome, which is magnetically sensitive protein in the eyes of insects and birds. And yes, they use it to determine magnetic north, for example. And cryptochrome-based navigation can be interrupted or disturbed by by certain frequencies, man-made frequencies. So, yeah, it gets so complicated, and we're not looking at these questions with due diligence. That would be a simple way of saying the problem. And we're trusting that manufacturers aren't going to sell us anything unless it's been tested, and also that telecom corporations aren't going to give us infrastructure unless it's safe for us to, live right next to. And we would be wrong in those assumptions.
It's funny that we would do that too, because this pattern happens a bunch of times. There was, lead poisoning when sailors, they'd have like early canned goods, and I think they would seal the cans with lead. And then we had like, lead paint and lead in the pencils, and then kids are getting lead poisoning and asbestos and just all these different things. We definitely get ahead of the curve, probably just because we're like, look how useful this new thing is, whatever it may be. And so the benefits are outweighing the potential negative effects, whether we, I guess in a lot of cases, we're not really thinking about it in this giant mountain of evidence and negative health impacts, to say the least, happen.
So I want to go back. I want to go back to where you were saying that you gradually have been returning to wired devices, or that's your aim. And that's really interesting to me, that you've moved in that direction. Something has changed in your thinking that you're exploring that. And I'm going to say, I'm just looking at the time, and I think this has been a great conversation. And right now, I'm thinking it would be really cool if we did a conversation focused on solutions.
Yeah, there you go.
And then, but also if we did one focused on the internet's energy consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, and toxic waste and worker hazards. And some of those solutions they dovetail with ones for protecting yourself. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I find, and when I did kind of tail off into like 20 different directions for a minute, it's kind of, part of it was because I'm fascinated with the intersection of all these things, because it is so complicated and complex, and it's not so simple, especially in the world today and the way things operate. The connections between the things. That's one reason why I do the podcast in general, is because there's all these different things that I'm interested in, and it's fascinating to learn about how they all fit together in different ways. And so
what I hear is that you're trying to figure stuff out.
Yeah, it's all about one of the
and
buzzwords
that's cool.
is like sense making. It's like, how do we make sense out of this giant mess that we're in? And even if I'm not even paying attention to whatever the mess may be, or which messes I'm paying attention to or worrying about, like, just there's so many cool things happening at the same time that are just fascinating to learn about. And so it kind of all intersects, because as I find something, ooh, that's cool. Oh, but then there's this negative impact of that cool thing. So how do we make that better so that then we can continue on with making things more awesome, and just making life a better experience for everything, not just people, but the whole experience that we're having. So it's quite an exploration. So I again, like, what a great start. And I think doing more of these is a great way to go, because we've just barely scratched the surface of this.
But I think, but I'm pleased because of how much. Okay, so now people we've taken them to kindergarten.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying? That, I think this was great. And so what I would say is, okay, right now we've got, like, if we could do one about the internet's footprint, and then a third one about solutions, I think that would be a great series. I will send you a summary paper that I have written. I have a book about the Internet's footprint, but I don't have a publisher yet. And so I'm going to send you the summary paper. And if you read that, it's overwhelming. It's short, but it's only I think it's about 20 pages. But it's really dense and intense.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
I just keep stepping into these things. For some reason, I like to go into things that are really intense and overwhelming and try to figure it out and try to figure out how to deal with it. Also to try to figure out how to share it in a non-overwhelming way leading towards solutions. Because it's, like you said, it's intense. Especially for somebody who's not thinking about it at all. And you're like, hey.
Yeah.
How about all this?
Well, this is great. I'm really pleased. And
right on.
Okay, and thank you for reading the book, because it's just a whole, there's there are so many things going on here, because I'm on the page of wanting people to have basic information. I'm assuming that most people are not going to read the book. And then I have this other enormous amount of research about the Internet's footprint, which really is unknown, but it's just devastating what's going on. And then, okay, we've got the solutions, but then the other thing is, once you're aware of what we have done, what we don't really know how to roll back, it's really profound.
You listening at this moment in your experience, I'm curious about your response to this stuff. How does this conversation add to your existing knowledge base? And more importantly, how do you feel? If you're so motivated, please feel free to click the show notes link to the online message form. You can also send email to genuinelyuseful@gmail.com. Easily share this podcast via direct links to multiple podcast apps, Twitter, Facebook. It's all in the show notes there. And if you'd like to help this project and its visibility to others, head over to Apple Podcasts, scroll down a bit on your phone, and rate the show with stars. You can also leave comments to help others decide they want to listen. Aside from it being nice for me to give feedback, it all helps with search algorithms, so I'm told. So, all right. Next episode will be with Katie Singer for part 2, and we'll be talking about expanding the scope of our awareness about the internet itself. This amazing internet that has allowed, for instance, this podcast to get to you from me, or a comment or rating from you to me. So now, I'm going to let the sounds of the Amazon jungle take you to the end for a little while. If you'd like to hear more jungle sounds, link to Bandcamp is in the show notes. Welcome to the jungle.